leaders shaped by a state like no other.
I have this passion because I truly believe in Texas exceptionalism.
They want your support to lead Texas into the future.
I've always said public service defines itself. It's service to the public.
A choice for voters.
I want to do everything I can as governor to keep Texas the most exceptional state in the United States.
Between competing visions.
Instead of pointing out all our differences, we should be pointing out the things we have in common.
Now the top candidates take the stage in the Texas Gubernatorial Debate. Hello, and thank you for joining us for a special edition of State of Texas. I'm Josh Hinkle. 30 minutes from now, Governor Greg Abbott will face Democratic challenger Lupe Valdez in their only debate of the campaign season. We'll bring it to you live. As we count down to that debate, we want to give you a closer look at both candidates and the experiences that shaped them and led them to the leadership roles they have. But first, we want to give you an idea of how this debate will play out. Our Robert Hadlock will be hosting the debate from the LBJ Library, and as he shows us, this setup is a little different than other debates.
That's right, Josh. The biggest difference this week is there is no studio audience here in the Frank Irwin Atrium. Remember last week in Dallas they had one during the Senate debate. That is because that was one of the really hard demands that was made by Governor Abbott, that there be no studio audience. There is an audience, however, downstairs in the LBJ auditorium, split 50-50 between the two candidates. Each candidate will get 60 seconds to answer the questions that are asked tonight, and there will be a rebuttal period. We have 4 journalists from various television stations in Texas. Among them is Julie Fine, who was a moderator of the debate last week involving Beto O'Rourke and Senator Cruz. It'll all begin at 7 o'clock here on KXAN. We'll see you then.
Thank you, Robert. As he just told us, there is no live audience in the room with the candidates, but there is a crowd of supporters for each candidate gathering nearby. Politics reporter Phil Prazen joins us from Bass Lecture Hall at the LBJ Library, where people will be watching the debate. Phil?
Well, Josh and Robert, I'm just across the way from where the debate is going to take place in a lower level of the LBJ School of Public Affairs here at the University of Texas at Austin. The crowd's just coming in to watch the debate. As you can see, they'll be watching it right up there on this big TV screen here in the auditorium. That's me, as you see. And then over here we have supporters of Lupe Valdez. She gave some of her tickets to major labor groups. I talked to some people from the AFL-CIO, which is a prominent Texas labor organization. And then on the other side, you'll have the supporters of Governor Greg Abbott. He gave a lot of his tickets to well-known law enforcement organizations. I talked to some people from the San Antonio Police Association. So it's there's still some room here. People are still filing in, and we will. It will be a pretty lively audience. They're going to keep it respectful and just do more cheers and not that many boos, hopefully. But right now, we'll send it back to you in the studio.
Hey, Phil, real quick, we heard that the governor gave his allotment of audience tickets to members of the law enforcement community. Who did the Valdez campaign invite?
Well-known labor organizations, AFL-CIO. There's also some Democratic candidates here. I saw the candidate for Lieutenant Governor on the Democratic side, Mike Collier. Also, there's a chairman of the Republican Party here, James Dickey. So well-known politicians and also groups from law enforcement and also labor. So they'll be watching the debate here tonight.
All right, Phil, thank you very much. After the Texas gubernatorial debate, we'll bring you live in-depth analysis. We'll be joined by a panel of journalists, including Joy Diaz, the producer for the Texas Standard on KUT Public Radio, Lauren McGaughey, the Texas government reporter for the Dallas Morning News, and Carlos Sanchez, the news and politics editor for Texas Monthly. And we'll also be bringing you some insight from some of the Texas voters who are undecided about the race for governor. We have a group of them here at our station right now. Our Sally Hernandez is live in the newsroom with details about a focus group gearing up to watch the debate. Sally.
Hi, Josh. Good to see you. Yeah, we have in this room behind me, we have about 24 registered voters. They intend to vote in this race in November. The thing about this group is they are registered as Democrats, Republicans, or independents, but all of them say they are undecided in who they want to vote for. So after the debate, we may get a good idea of who they want to vote for. And we'll also get a good idea of what they think about the candidates' reaction to some of these answers, because as they're watching along with you at home, this group has this in their hand. It's a dial. So they could set it when they hear a candidate's answer to 50, and that's kind of average, right? They don't think it's unfavorable, their answer. They don't think it is very favorable. But if they turn it to lower than 50, they think the lower the number, the more that they didn't like that answer. The higher the number, the more they like that answer. So this dial goes all the way from 0 to 100. So in this room right now is that focus group that we were talking about. They're going to watch that debate with you. Turn those dials downward to indicate an unfavorable reaction. Turn the dials the other way to indicate that they have a favorable reaction. And then at the conclusion, we're going to talk to this group one more time. We're going to learn how their opinions about the candidates have been impacted because of the debate, and if they've now decided, Josh, who they're going to vote for.
Sally, what do we know about these people? Are they older, younger, more men than women?
We know a lot about them. We did ask them a few questions. So we know that the majority of the people in this room are considered Gen Xers. We also have a good mix of millennials in this group. We have a good mix of baby boomers. Also, it's split down when it comes to 50% women in this group, 50% men. And some are Democrat, equal split there, equal split with Republicans, and some, as we mentioned, are independent registered voters as well, Josh.
All right, Sally, thank you very much. We'll catch up with you later.
A freak accident put Greg Abbott in a wheelchair permanently, but a decision he made about his recovery put his life on a new course.
If I spent any time on trying to be able to walk again, that would be time lost, and I wanted to get on with my life.
A story of overcoming a devastating injury and the choices that led to the governor's mansion. Insight into Greg Abbott's life next on this special edition of State of Texas.
We're taking a closer look at who the candidates are tonight. Governor Greg Abbott won the pre-debate coin toss, which means he'll take the first question in the debate. With that in mind, we will start with Governor Abbott as we begin our look at the stories behind the candidates. Phil Prazen shows us Abbott's life forever changed when he was 26 years old.
On July 14th, 1984, an ambulance rushed Greg Abbott to the hospital. An oak tree fell on the 26-year-old while jogging with a friend. He spent a month in the hospital and 6 weeks in a Houston rehab facility. While he watched other patients devote their lives to regaining the ability to walk, Abbott turned down experimental treatments. He'd use a wheelchair the rest of his life.
It immediately clicked that if I spent any time on trying to be able to walk again, that would be time lost. I never allowed myself to be weighed down with, oh gosh, would have I done this or that, or how my life would be different. Instead, I always cast my eyes forward and move forward in life as opposed to constantly looking back.
Greg Abbott was born in Wichita Falls. His family moved around northeast Texas before settling in Duncanville. When he was in high school, his father passed away of a heart attack.
It was a big loss, and there's a vacuum in your life whenever you lose a parent. And it immediately thrust more responsibility on my mom, and it thrust more responsibility both on myself as well as my brother.
He excelled at track and field, was voted most likely to succeed, and graduated from the University of Texas at Austin. That's where he met Cecilia. The couple married in 1981, and 3 years later, just before the bar exam, that accident left him paralyzed. In the months ahead, his new life tested his faith.
Why did this happen? How could you allow something like this to happen, etc.? But I found that the more I asked, the more questions seemed to be provided with solid answers.
And one of those answers was Cecilia.
You take an oath for better, for worse, in sickness and health, until death do we part. At a time of a marriage, that's so easy to recite. And she was put to the test in sickness and in health, but it was a challenge that she embraced with great support from me, and that made our relationship and our marriage even stronger.
He passed that bar exam and went on to practice law in Houston. The Abbotts adopted their daughter Audrey and began planning a future for her, while he decided to make the next step. He grew frustrated when he thought local judges missed the mark on the law.
The reason I went to law school to begin with is because I cherished the rule of law in this country. I wanted to make sure that it was preserved and passed on. I wanted to be a judge myself so that I would do it right.
His work as a Harris County judge caught the eye of then Governor George W. Bush, who appointed Abbott to the Supreme Court of Texas. And when the incumbent Texas Attorney General moved on in 2002, Abbott ran for the job and won. a path that eventually led him to the governor's mansion. And some of his major accomplishments as governor so far in his first term, he pushed lawmakers to pass budgets that included nearly $4 billion worth of tax cuts, which included earlier dedicating more money to early childhood development and transportation. Now, he tried to get lawmakers to go along with sweeping ethics reforms, and they never really quite gave him what they wanted during both the sessions. But his most famous bill signing was Senate Bill 4. He declared it an emergency item the last regular session. It required local law enforcement officials to hold people who committed crimes here illegally until federal immigration officials pick them up for deportation, and it also allows local police to ask immigration status of the people they arrest. Now, that new law was major motivation for Governor Abbott's now opponent, Lupe Valdez, to launch her campaign against him.
If you see harm, you either stop it or do something about it, or speak out.
And we're going to take a closer look at her story and some of the experiences that led her to take on this campaign. That's next on this special edition of State of Texas. Welcome back to this special edition of State of Texas here before the governor's debate between incumbent Republican Greg Abbott and the challenger Democrat Lupe Valdez. Earlier, we took a look at Governor Greg Abbott's life. Now we turn to Lupe Valdez, and her story is a story of firsts. She was the first Latina and LGBT Texan to lead a major law enforcement agency. Lupe Valdez grew up in one of the poorest areas of San Antonio. Her parents were migrant farm workers, and she remembers being turned away at a Dallas County restaurant because the staff wouldn't serve Mexican Americans.
To stare at your parents and go, why can't we eat here? You know, and parents have to choose how they explain things to you.
But one day at junior high, a substitute teacher noticed her good work and told her she could make it to college one day.
And I remember he used to take the bus because he came way from the other side of town, and he took the time to miss his bus schedule or whatever to talk to me so I could find opportunity.
So she began riding the bus herself to a high school on the rich side of town. That led to college in Oklahoma City. After that, she enlisted in a tank battalion in the United States military and became a captain in the U.S. National Guard.
There's a teamwork in the military that I wish we could package more on the outside. Every job depends on somebody else, and you've got to be able to work together to make it happen.
She was a pioneer in male-dominated fields, in the county and federal prison systems, as an undercover federal agent tackling white-collar crimes, and as a U.S. Customs agent.
You're taught that when you can't find a way, you go out and make a way, make it happen. And so as a group of small women, we made it happen.
And then in 2004, she decided to get into local politics, running for Dallas County Sheriff. No Democrat had won in decades.
You know, at that time, being lesbian was not as easy as it is now. Although it's never easy, it's easier. And at that time, it wasn't. And I remember several people saying to me, you know, that's the first thing that's going to come out. They're just going to smear you up and down with us. And so I had to be comfortable that I wanted to do this bad enough to take whatever was coming.
She came from behind to win, not just that time, but 3 other times. And years later, when she won the Democratic nomination for governor, she reflected on her poverty and the restaurant that turned her family away years ago.
I was elected the sheriff of the same town that turned us away.
And now she's again an underdog as she aims for the top spot in the state. And before Valdez was sheriff of that department, there were a lot of corruption allegations with the sheriff's department, and the jail failed state and federal inspections. She was credited for turning that agency around for the most part. And then she was also appointed by then President Barack Obama to be a part of a committee on immigration reform in 2011. But Governor Abbott and Sheriff Valdez have tangled before over the debate surrounding SB 4 and requiring her jail to hold more people for deportation proceedings. So, Josh, in just a few minutes, the two candidates will get their chance to present 2 very different views of this state and the future of this state. But for now, we'll send it back to you in the studio.
Welcome back. It comes as no surprise that Texas is divided along party lines just like the country. Texas issues are American issues. So we reached out to some supporters of the candidates to talk about what challenges lie ahead and how Governor Abbott or Lupe Valdez could handle them.
Not only will two candidates square off, but two ideas of Texas, a booming economy and clogged roadways, record jobs, tiny unemployment, along with the largest number of people without health insurance, some of the best universities and some of the most crowded schools. And add in one massive hurricane.
I think in times of crisis, that's when real leadership shows through, and the way that Governor Abbott has handled the post-Hurricane Harvey response has been tremendous. I mean, hurricanes are very difficult issues to respond to. Once the cameras go away, it's not that the crisis is solved.
Deirdre DeLisi entered politics in the 90s when Republicans began to take control of state government. She then worked as chief of staff for former Governor Rick Perry and chairwoman of the Transportation Commission. She says managing the state's growing economy and population will be the governor's primary task in the next 4 years.
People are moving to Texas. Over 1,000 people a day are coming to the state because of what they see Texas offers. They see Texas offers jobs, opportunity, and a great education system for their kids. And so that's wonderful, but it's taxing on our infrastructure, it's taxing on our roads, it's taxing on our schools.
But while some see growth, others see people left behind.
We have a shrinking middle class, and that's in part why people are just done with the politics that have gotten us here, done with the lip service, and want to see somebody who gets what they've been through. And Sheriff Valdez is that person.
Austin Representative Gina Hinojosa is an up-and-coming Texas lawmaker focusing on public education. Before this, she was a school board trustee at one of the state's largest school districts. She describes the state's biggest challenge ahead is ensuring the state does not form a vast underclass of people with no way up the ladder.
She has experienced herself the vast benefits of a good education. She beat the odds because of it, and she understands the importance of it.
And the debate will soon play out between those who believe low taxes and low regulations are right, who say if the leadership isn't broke, don't fix it.
A rising tide lifts all boats. There's a reason why people are coming to Texas.
To creating an opportunity for those at the bottom and the quest for new blood at the top.
Despite working full-time jobs, struggle to ever have a mortgage with health care. These are the basic promise of what was thought to be a middle-class lifestyle.
Texans will soon decide after the two candidates face off on stage Friday night.
And that debate is just minutes away. Both candidates are getting ready to go into the hall, and the audience is gathering in a nearby auditorium to watch. That's where politics reporter Phil Prazen is standing by live. Phil, remind us who's in the audience.
Well, yeah, actually more people have shown up, and it's almost a packed house. On the left, you'll see Lupe Valdez supporters. AFL-CIO is here. On the right, you're going to see Abbott supporters and law enforcement groups from around the state of Texas. They've come to cheer on their candidates.
Now, polls in this race have had Governor Abbott with a double-digit lead, but there's still a lot of undecided Texans. What's Lupe Valdez going to have to do tonight to get her message to those people?
Well, the whole thing about the debates rarely help a candidate, right? So their strategies going in is really just make as few mistakes as possible. Lupe Valdez is going to try and make Governor Abbott make mistakes, say embarrassing comments. It's you only really remember the bad comments, right? I mean, if you go back in time to when Rick Perry famously said, "Oops," I mean, you don't know any other line of that debate besides that. But so that's going to be both the strategies. Governor Abbott doesn't want to make mistakes. Lupe Valdez wants to try to get him to make mistakes.
Now, immigration is going to be one of the key topics in the debate tonight. We talked earlier about the differences between Governor Abbott and Sheriff Valdez. We'll likely see those differences play out tonight also.
Yeah, their fight before this has really been about immigration. If you remember, Governor Abbott prioritized SB 4, deemed a law against sanctuary cities. Lupe Valdez was a very strong critic of that. That law did passing, but she's been a critic of that law, and then also a critic of his dedicating resources towards the border, signing budgets that dedicate really hundreds of millions of dollars to border security. That has been the #1 issue for Republicans, and the Governor Abbott has delivered on that.
Before we go, I know that both candidates say that they support Texans' right to own guns, but there are some sharp differences too.
Sharp differences, especially after recent high-profile shootings here in Texas. Santa Fe High School, Sutherland Springs. They're going to have two very different viewpoints on who can have a gun, when, and where. And so expect that to come up tonight as well. Josh.
All right, Phil, thank you very much. We will check back with you after the debate. And thank you for joining us. I'm Josh Hinkle. We'll be back in 1 hour to bring you post-debate perspective in an extended special edition of State of Texas.